9:25, you are listening to the Keith Hansen Show on WNTK and WUVR, 99.7 FM, 98.9 FM, 1490 AM, and streaming around the globe at WNTK.com. I'm always amazed at how many people message me from other countries, actually. Got a lot of people that listen over in the Middle East and certainly over in Europe, so certainly appreciate that as well. And feel free to let me know where you're listening from. Keith at WNTK.com is the email. Again, Keith at WNTK.com. All right. Gives me great pleasure to welcome back to the program Dan Wos, nationally recognized Second Amendment advocate and spokesperson, author of Good Gun, Bad Guy, Behind the Lies of the Anti-Gun Radical, and Good Gun, Bad Guy 2, Destroying the Anti-Gun Narrative. Dan, we got a lot of things that have occurred since the last time we talked to you. We got the STEM school shooting here, which it's kind of it's a media blackout now at this point because the perpetrators of that crime not exactly fitting the demographics that they would like to see of a school shooter. We got Cory Booker's absolutely ridiculous gun control proposal that, you know what, if you own an assault weapon, air fingers quote, you and I both know there's no such thing as an assault weapon, but when you're a progressive socialist, everything is an assault weapon, and he wants to throw people in jail for them. So where do you want to start?
Oh, geez, you know where I'd really like to start is the vigil that the kids at the school had that got hijacked by a bunch of anti-gun dirtbags. You had these kids who wanted to have a vigil to remember their friend who died, the kid who actually tried to stop the killers. His name was Kendrick Castillo. He's a little hero. And what happened was the kids were going to have this vigil at the school. It was in the gymnasium. They got hijacked by Colorado Senator Michael Bennet, Representative Jason Crow, both Democrats, of course, and anti-gun Democrats, and the Moms Demand Representative Laura Reeves was there. They all decided they would take the microphone and they would start pushing for more gun control and continue to do more NRA bashing. So the kids got so mad by the time dirtbag Laura Reeves got to the microphone that they started walking out. So that's a pretty astonishing thing that they would have the nerve to politicize the deaths of children at a time like this, one day after this terrible event.
Well, never let a crisis go to waste, though, Dan. I mean, this is a perfect opportunity for them. I mean, this is the perfect narrative. Unfortunately, the problem with the narrative are the two individuals that were responsible for perpetrating this act. We're not going to. I don't mention names, at least in my talk radio capacity. At least in this capacity, I adhere to the don't name them philosophy. We don't want to give them credit. But here's a transgender and an anti-Christian, radical anti-Trumper. Doesn't exactly fit what they. Now, I mean, if this guy were, if he were, a flannel shirt wearing, MAGA hat wearing, pickup truck wearing NRA member, we'd never. I mean, it would be dominating the 24-hour news cycle.
Yeah, and you know what they're afraid of. You know what the anti-gun left is scared of right now is that if people started talking about what caused these two kids to go so violent, you gotta look at the cause of this stuff, and that's where I try to get to. I try to get to the cause. They're always talking about guns and stuff, but it's really get down to the cause and the psychology of what causes this anger and this rage in these kids. This kid was a Trump hater and an anti-Christian. Now, where does that anger come from? Where is that anger and rage cultivated? It comes from the left. This is a product of radical, angry, destructive left-wing politics. Mm-hmm.
No, I would absolutely agree with you, and I would add another one on there too, which is the indoctrination of students in these government-run education centers known as public schools.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so they create the problem, and then they try to blame it on good, law-abiding, gun owners. It's disgusting. But you know what the good news is? There's always a little bit of good news if we look for it. The kids walked out, and that tells me that people are starting to catch on. They're starting to see the deceitful ways of the anti-gun left. and kids are smart, and even though they're indoctrinated and they're getting this stuff fed into their minds every single day, they still have common sense, and they were smart enough to walk out, and they were smart enough to acknowledge that these people were hijacking their vigil. So there's the good news if we can take some good news out of it.
No, I think it's outstanding that they had the decency to recognize that, and in the process exposing the radical anti-gun left for the opportunistic parasites that they really are. I mean, let's be very honest. I mean, these are parasites. These are people that leech on. They attach themselves to a bad situation, and they literally milk it for everything that it's worth. And the words of Rahm Emanuel come to mind. Never let a crisis go to waste. Maybe you wouldn't necessarily find a receptive audience for gun control, but suddenly now when you're looking at dead kids, I've said this before, victims are currency in the Democrat Party. The Democrats loved it, especially the progressive Democrats, like nothing more than to stand on a pile of dead children and scream for more votes and more money. Oh, we're going to fix this for you. We're going to make all of these problems go away. We're going to legislate the evil out of people's hearts. I was having a conversation last night privately with Herman Cain. Herman came to the Dartmouth College campus yesterday. When you and I were speaking last night,
good for you. Great guy.
Yeah, when you and I were speaking on the phone last night, as a matter of fact, I was coming back from Dartmouth, where I just spent some time with, and I got a nice chunk of time with him privately before he went on. He and I have a connection together down in Naples, Florida. But in any event, we were talking about the narratives and the tactics that these people are using, and the need to manipulate facts and to manipulate and to purposely malign data and the narrative to control that narrative. And this is exactly what you're seeing here. It's the opportunistic, parasitic mindset that something bad happened, we have to capitalize on this, and we have to stand on literally. I say this and stand on the pile of dead children.
Yeah, well, that's true. It's so unfortunate. I mean, it really is terrible that they don't want to save lives as much as they want to ban guns and just to achieve their agenda. And that's what makes this thing so sickening. And I wish, and I hope, I don't know if you have any liberal progressives listening to this show, but I really wish that they would try to put their politics aside if they can for just 1 minute and really think about how they've been manipulated by the Democratic Party, especially on the topic of guns. And if people can really just put the politics aside and try to understand what's happened to them, they would switch sides in a heartbeat. But they can't, because the indoctrination is really deep, and it's really thick. And what it does is it capitalizes on people's need to be right, and people's need to be smart, and people's need to feel morally superior. So the minute anybody admits that they've been taken for a ride by the radical left, that would mean that they'd have to admit that they were wrong and maybe weren't so smart.
Yeah, it's always interesting when I have a conversation with somebody on the opposite side of the aisle. One of the questions, and I guess this has just become kind of the litmus test, are you willing to consider that you may be wrong about something? I'm willing to consider that I'm wrong. Listen, I will have a conversation, a respectful conversation with anybody about any topics that I put forth with strong assertions. Change my mind. Tell me that I'm wrong. Don't tell me that I'm wrong. Show me that I'm wrong. Find exactly where listen to my narrative, find where my mistake is, and then refute the central point of my argument using logic and facts and information. And listen, if I'm wrong, I will admit it. I will say to you, okay, you know what? Listen, and I did. I had my mind changed about not entirely. I give you a perfect example. So, we're going through right now they're trying to repeal the death penalty. And the death penalty repeal initiative here in the state of New Hampshire was being spearheaded by a number of people that I know that I've worked with in professional capacities who call themselves conservatives. There was an organization called the Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. I had them on the program a number of times, and I'm talking to their spokesperson and their public media people. And I said, here's what I want to do. You're a professional, but you're a mouthpiece for an organization. Not that that's a bad thing. It's just that's what you do. You're in charge of the media, and so you grant these interviews. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to get me two people who were on death row, who were exonerated, who are no longer on death row. I want to have a conversation with them, because if I'm wrong about this, I want the information, and I want to speak to two people who lived it firsthand. And so they brought me two death row exonerees on. And I said, okay, I am willing to change my perspective on this. I'm not now going to be against the death penalty, but I am going to restrict or limit the instances in which the death penalty should be considered. I still believe it should be an option, and just because it's an option doesn't mean it's an option that has to be exercised. We're not juicing and jolting people here, in record numbers every week. We've got one guy on death row. One guy. For the murder of a police officer back in 2006. That's it. So it's really it's a non-issue here. But if I'm wrong, or if there's something that I can do to make my standpoint better, I'm willing to listen. So it's just a long, drawn-out way of saying, ask people, and I'm sure you do this, I do this. Are you open to the possibility that you may be incorrect in your assumption or your assertion?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Now, just so you know, I think you already know this, I've been on both sides of the gun conversation. I've taken both positions on it. I've been wrong, and I've admitted it, and it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing when you're wrong, because what that means is that maybe you weren't paying attention. Maybe you weren't looking at things logically. So I ask you, why are they so locked in and can't admit they're wrong, but can't even look at the situation from a different perspective? And the best reason I can come up with is that the people who gravitate toward that side have been taught their whole lives that they're smarter than everybody else, and their schooling is so important to them, and they believe that college, college education makes you superior to everyone else. They've been told that they're morally superior because they want to help people. They're really out there to save lives and help people. So they've been fed all this stuff. And, it's when you're that locked in to a position, it's hard to go back. It's hard to change because it means something about the person. And that's a hard thing. And hey, I have to admit, when the most uncomfortable thing is when you're wrong. It's a little embarrassing, because you're exposing yourself to maybe not being so smart on a topic, maybe not knowing a certain thing, thinking that you did. So it's that little bit of embarrassment. But the thing is, the people who aren't afraid to take on that embarrassment or the admitting that they're wrong are people with a higher level of self-esteem. I've learned that confidence and self-esteem really is at the core of all this, because those who can't admit they're wrong typically do it because they don't have that strong sense of self. They don't have that strong confidence already. Whereas people who can admit that they're wrong, like you, are already confident in themselves, and they know who they are.
All right, so I'm fascinated by this. I wasn't aware of this. So you were at one point in time in favor of gun control. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I was raised in a pro-gun family, but then I started hanging with anti-gun liberals in my 20s. I was playing touring in rock bands and stuff, and I started to take on that mentality, that thought process that, guns are dangerous, we don't really need them, and all that nonsense. Because that was the environment I surrounded myself with, and I tell you, that stuff does get into your head. We are a product of our environment. I don't care where you are, you take on that environment, and unfortunately, that stuff was being fed into my head every day. But so I had a conflict of reality there. I knew guns weren't these dangerous things they're talking, because my dad and I used to have great time with them. We'd go hunting and target shooting and stuff. So I had a conflict within my own thought process. I eventually came out of it and realized, the truth, and realized how important guns are to the safety of to our families and to our, in our country. So I woke up, and it was an incident that my wife and I had coming out of a late night movie theater. I tell the story in the book that really flipped me and said, "Hey, wait a minute! What am I doing with this anti-gun mindset? This anti-gun thought process is just putting myself and my family in danger. It's a terrible way to think." So I was able to jump ship and come over to reality.
That's that's fascinating. I got to be honest. Was there one thing that really did it? I mean, was there something that decision, that moment of clarity was predicated on? What precipitated that?
Well, there was a long period of time where I had a sense of this, like, they call it cognitive dissonance, where you have two beliefs fighting each other. The one belief was guns are good. They're as long as you know how to use them, they're safe. They're fun. You can protect yourself and your family. And my dad and I had great times with guns, shooting guns. It brought us together. So there's this great feeling that I had associated with guns. But then on the other hand, there was this anger and a fearful hatred kind of feeling that was being programmed. Kind of like just because of the environment I was in. So I had both of these feelings, and I realized that the fearful, angry part associated to guns was really just because I was trying to conform to this environment that I was in. It didn't feel right to me, but it was there, and there was leverage among, put on by the people around me too, but that's another thing that we should talk about. We need more time, but that was another thing. We the leverage that's put on people to stay in the anti-gun camp is fierce.
Yeah,
they will shun you, and they will beat you down if you go and look for alternative views.
Yeah,
but anyway.
Actually, that brings up a really good point. Are you tight for time, or do you have a couple more minutes?
I am. I got another one. I got a couple more minutes. We can keep going. I got until 10.
Okay. So the big question here is then: do you think that the results of or what produces the rabid anti-gun mobs is the mob mentality? Where, people, when you think about the mob mentality, so you get this group that's acting as rioters, for instance. They go out and they get caught up. They're finding support. They're finding approval amongst peer members for behaving antisocially, and so it just fuels that frenzy. Do you think that kind of that mindset, that mob mentality, translates over to the anti-gun crowds? Well, hey, listen, I don't want to be drummed out of the social circle, and they're all saying, oh, guns are bad, guns are evil, blah 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 blah. So I have to just lockstep follow these people, because if I don't, then I'm going to be drummed out of that little social circle.
Yeah, well, that's part of it. And in Good Gun, Bad Guy, I talk about that. There's a chapter called Sit at the Popular Table. And if anybody remembers the popular table in middle school, you could sit at that popular table if you conformed to the views and the ideals of those people. In other words, you had to eat from that menu, and only from that menu. And the minute you would stray, you would be shunned, you would be kicked out, you would be ridiculed, and all that stuff. So that's part of it. But that stuff is only effective on weak-minded people who can't stand alone, people who need that reassurance and that group support. And then there's also, when it comes to guns, there's also a lack of knowledge, a lack of information involved, because they don't know. It's easy to get people to jump on that anti-gun bandwagon if they don't know anything about guns, because all they're exposed to is what the popular table wants them to know. So it's a real strong manipulation of the thought process.
Yeah.
And I had that cognitive dissonance because I knew better.
Yeah.
But I still had that leverage for me. So it felt uncomfortable for a number of years, and then all of a sudden it really clicked when I almost needed to defend my wife, and I was unable to do it.
All right, so let me ask you this here. I would say that the vast majority of people who listen to my programs are pro Second Amendment. And I talk to, I network with so many people, Dan, it's unbelievable. I talk to listeners constantly, and I'm constantly meeting listeners and interfacing with them, whether it's email or, social media messages or face-to-face. And so I know that a lot of people who listen to my program, they talk to people. They're engaged in having conversations that could be impactful on other people. So if a person is engaged in a conversation, in a debate, in a discussion, in an argument with somebody who is anti-gun, in your experience, what has been the best way to kind of make that person take pause and actually think, to put those cognitive biases down, to kind of penetrate that defense mechanism and get that person to go, okay, I never really looked at it from that perspective. Do you have one? Do you know of one?
Well, there are plenty of little strategies and things like that, but really what you have to try to do is help people put their what's usually an illogical view side by side with reality, and it's hard to do because you want them to see the reality of the argument, the honest portion of that argument, but they're blocking it with their irrational belief. So sometimes we can say stuff like, we're talking about gun restrictions and gun laws and stuff like that. We can help them maybe see the contrast between their view and what's actual reality by saying things like, or showing them how they, killers, you have a killer on one hand who's willing to take a life, and then on the other hand, they're implementing things like, magazine capacity restrictions. And you can ask them, do you really believe that the killer, someone who's willing to kill in cold blood, is not going to exceed a bullet limit? So, and try to help them see, or do you really believe that a sign that says gun-free zone is going to deter someone who wants to go in and kill people? Or is it going to encourage them to go in because they know that no one in there is armed and can defend themselves? So it's just a matter of trying to take their illogical argument and just showing them, sometimes we got to do it gently, showing them a reality and try to smash those two beliefs up against each other and help them wrestle with that.
Mm-hmm. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, a couple of days ago, and one of the things that he had indicated worked for him was the co-opting of the language. And I said, well, give me an example. And he said, okay, well, he said, progressive socialists are always talking about everything is wrapped up in the context of social justice. So people are always talking about, well, what about my right to access to my access to health care, my access to, services. So he said, in the course of conversation about guns, I just phrase it, well, what about my access to self-defense? And he said, what he said that actually, when you start to use their language, it makes a connection with them.
Because, that's true.
So I was curious what your thoughts were on that. If you started to frame the conversation about, well, okay, so you're in favor of a gun confiscation or a gun ban, but let's talk about my right to access or my ability to access self-defense.
Yeah, and that's definitely a way to look at it. But they usually do have an argument that nobody needs to, like, I don't know if it was you we were talking where somebody said they're going to have a conversation with the killer if he breaks into the house.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Because so that's where the illogic comes in. But what I found a lot of times is that if you take the hard edge approach and you really do bash them on their intelligence and you do bash them on their morals, because if you ask them to check their morality, because here's the thing, if they believe that it's okay to bus hundreds of children into a school and keep them there for 8 hours a day and take away all armed security and then post signs telling everyone that the place is unarmed and unprotected, you can ask these anti-gunners if they should really, consider checking their morals on that. And if they really do want to save kids, then maybe they should reconsider. So stuff like that, the real internal stuff, the morality part of it and the intelligence part of it, if we can tap into some of that, it gets the message through.
Well, that makes sense too, and I like the idea of co-opting the language, because I mean, again, if it's something that they're already fluent in, then it certainly may just be the mechanism that helps you to kind of break through that standoffish defense mechanism that oftentimes they run with. Dan, I'm going to have to leave it right there. I know you're getting tight on time, as am I. We're coming up towards the top of the hour here. So Dan Wos, nationally recognized Second Amendment advocate and spokesperson, author of Good Gun, Bad Guy, the Behind the Lies of the Anti-Gun Radical, and Good Gun, Bad Guy 2, Destroying the Anti-Gun Narrative. And I don't know if it's premature or not, but I guess, we might as well plant the seeds out there now. Dan and I are going to be panelists on a Second Amendment discussion that's going to be held, as of right now, it looks like it's going to be held on Friday, June 7th, right here at the Kearsarge High School in Sutton. So the three panelists talking about gun control, Second Amendment issues. Myself, Dan Wos, he's going to be there personally, as well as Kimberly Morin. Kim's been on the show many, many times before. So it should be a very lively discussion. Looking forward to partaking in that panel with both Kim and Dan. And I would encourage people, check out Dan's books. They're fantastic. A lot of good information and some very, very good insights. Dan, always a pleasure, sir. And you're welcome back anytime. We will talk soon.
Thanks so much, pal. Talk to you soon.
Be well. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, click that subscribe button down below and also the notification bell to keep updated on all my radio interviews, TV interviews, and the Dan Wos Destroys, where I analyze and tear apart the anti-gun media narrative. My books can be found at goodgunbadguy.net or goodgunbadguy.com. And don't forget, your Second Amendment, it's not a privilege, it's your right.